was October 2007. I was 12, and my brother was 14. It was pretty chaotic. Cops came in, we got taken into a van, and from then, just drove off. I couldn't really understand it. I mean, as a little kid, just thinking, hey, you're taken from your family and you're put in another home, and that's your family.
I had my daughter at a very young age. A couple of months later, I got pregnant again. They say that I couldn't be living in a basement due to that I was pregnant and I had already a baby. So that's when ACS took my sister, me and my daughter into the system. I was 13 when that happened.
When I first got into the system, the first thing I wanted was to go home. My mom, she was on drugs, yes, and we got beaten, yes, but I grew up for that to be my safety, and to be taken away from that was traumatic.
If the system worked as it should, there would be no need for CASA, but it doesn't.
It is bureaucratic. There are many parties involved, caseworkers, attorneys.
You go for one appointment and then you're given another appointment. In order to proceed from A to B, you have to go visit C over there and get this other thing signed.
And if someone isn't there advocating and calling and on top of you, you have to do this, you have to go there, you're frozen. You just don't know where to turn.
So we need a CASA to ensure that the system works.
A CASA volunteer is an advocate for a foster youth who is in care.
We are appointed by the judge, and we are a neutral person in the courtroom. We're problem solvers, we're fixers, we're cheerleaders. We don't have any other agenda besides the well-being of the children. Our goal is always, first and foremost, to get children returned to their parents whenever their parents are able to provide a safe and stable home environment. And when that can't happen, then we work towards adoption or permanent guardianship.
You're meeting children at a very vulnerable, challenging time in their lives. They're separated from their parents. All that's familiar to them, it's gone. And you get to create a positive difference in their lives.
Randy came into my life, I believe around I was like 13, 14. She showed up like at a hearing. My father had got deported and my mother was like on drugs. And I just had this wall up of, I don't trust you.
When I first got involved with Nigel, he was having trouble in middle school, and I spoke to his guidance counselor, and she said, Nigel's really a good kid. He's really a good kid, but he has an anger management problem, and it keeps getting him in trouble. And he kept getting into trouble and wound up incarcerated.
Throughout the time that I spent in foster care, nobody really was there for me. I was just another number in the system. So when I met Stephanie, I had the idea that she wasn't going to be very helpful.
You volunteer for a situation like this, and you have a very strong impulse to jump in and fix things. And CASA warns you that you want to tread lightly. The first thing you want to do is listen.
Part of our training is something called relentless engagement, and it's the idea that you should expect when you're working with a young person or often with a parent to be rejected. You should expect that they're going to be angry at you, that they're not going to trust you, that they're not going to return your calls. And if you keep showing up anyway, eventually they will begin to slowly but surely trust you.
It's going to take a while, but we get it. Our youth do not make it easy at all. So I tell my advocates that if a youth curse you out, that they actually getting comfortable with you.
After a couple of times meeting up, I was thinking, she came into my life for a reason. She had in her, in her mind that I could do much more than what I was doing.
For Nigel, too, he had to take his time to realize that I was there to accept him and be present for him. And I think that was a whole new thing for him. He was in prison for 3 years, and he was there alone. There was no one there for him. I can't imagine being in prison for 3 years and having no one that cares about you. Absolutely no one. So from that point on, I thought, I'm gonna stick with this kid. He's gonna make it.
Through it all, she just kept my head up. She showed me, this is not your life, this don't gotta be just the end of the road.
And at some point I said something where I used the word volunteer. And I saw her face just completely change. She said, "You don't get paid for this?"
"You're just doing this to help out?" She was, "Yes." And kind of shocked me a little bit because like my whole life, I never had someone that cared so much like she did. She pushed me to do better.
The impact of life itself is overwhelming. So when you don't have nobody in your corner, man, that weight just gets heavier and heavier.
The youth in the system, that's all they need is just that little bit of hope. That little bit of sunshine will make them shine, basically.
You're just there for them. It's a small thing, and yet it's the biggest thing of all.
Because at the end of the day, this is what we want. Somebody to stick with us through thick and thin and not give up.
Good evening, and welcome to the hashtag CASA-COVID Fall Speaker Series hosted by the CASA-NYC Associate Board. My name is Cedra Battersby Quintanilla, and I am the Associate Board Chair. We are made up of 40 young professionals who raise awareness and funding for CASA-NYC's mission. As you may know, CASA-NYC is a nonprofit, volunteer-based organization founded 40 years ago. Our staff and volunteers advocate for the rights and needs of children and youth in foster care. We work to ensure that children and youth transition into safe and permanent homes and that older youth have the resources that they need to live independently. Last year, 250 volunteers and a small professional staff served nearly 1,300 children and youth in foster care. Your presence tonight means so much to the Associate Board and to CASA-NYC. We sincerely hope you enjoyed tonight's program. And with that, I would like to introduce our benefit chair, Carmen Napier, who has been working tirelessly the last few months to put this series together. Thank you so much, Carmen, and thanks to all of you for your support.
The Associate Board is committed to CASA-NYC's mission, and to continue to support the organization, we pivoted our annual summer event to a virtual educational series. The series is composed of 5 sessions featuring expert speakers and timely topics impacting children in foster care. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Your video and mic are disabled, but we encourage you to chat with us in the chat box. There will be a Q&A session, so we encourage you to drop whatever questions you may have in the Q&A box. Another reminder, as a part of our speaker series, we are offering a special online auction featuring more than 20 curated unique items and experiences. Our auction closes tonight at 7:15 p.m., and the winners will be announced after our Q&A session. I'm also excited to announce that starting bids for some of these items have just been reduced. This is the perfect time to snag yourself that workout plan or find your next COVID hobby at an incredible price. The link for the auction is in the chat box and is easily accessible from your phone. We encourage you to continue bidding throughout tonight's program while being mindful and respectful of our speakers. Your bids directly support the mission of CASA-NYC. So please take a look at the fantastic items that several companies have so generously donated to the hashtag CASA-COVID Speaker Series. Without further ado, on behalf of the Associate Board, I am delighted to begin our presentation for Session 5 of the hashtag CASA-COVID Speaker Series, CASA-NYC's Youth and Advocates. Tonight's speakers are Khadijah Alexander and Barbara Edwards Delsman, who will share with you their experiences together navigating the foster care, courts, housing, and education systems, and the close relationship they have formed in the process. Diana O'Neill, Education and Awareness Co-Liaison on CASA-NYC's Associate Board, will moderate tonight's panel discussion. Khadijah, an alumna of NYC Foster Care, is a founding member of CASA-NYC's Youth Leadership Council. She has spent the last 2 years advocating for the improvement of child welfare services by sharing her experiences in foster care with advocates, child welfare professionals, and interested stakeholders. Khadijah is incredibly resilient and has aspirations of attaining a master's degree in special education. Barbara has served as a CASA volunteer advocate for 5 years and was Khadijah's volunteer advocate while she was in foster care, and even today continues to be a support for Khadijah. Barbara has more than 4 decades of experience spanning the nonprofit, education, and corporate sectors. Most recently, she was the executive director of the HOPE program, an NYC-based workforce development nonprofit for 2 decades. Today, in addition to volunteering with CASA, Barbara serves on the board of Community Entrepreneur Corp and the advisory board of Just Leadership USA. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Hi, everyone, and thank you again, Barbara and Khadijah, for being with us tonight to share your story. We've prepared some questions for an engaging discussion, so let's get into it and get to know the both of you. Barbara, I'll start with you. Tell us, how did you find CASA and what made you decide to get involved?
Okay, thanks, Diana. And I'd like to first say what an honor it is to be invited to be part of this speaker series. We hope we don't disappoint. We're looking forward to it. To answer your question, Diana, it was mentioned in the introduction, my most recent career was in social services. I was an executive director of a nonprofit that served individuals living in poverty. And when I retired, I was, of course, looking for something worthwhile to do. And I joined the startup team of a couple of organizations, which were mentioned in the introduction. But what I sorely missed was the opportunity to interact with young people, with children and young people. And a friend of mine is a CASA in New Jersey. And when he told me about CASA and about its reputation for excellence, I jumped at the opportunity and joined CASA right away and haven't regretted it for a moment.
That's wonderful, wonderful to hear about people spreading the news and attracting new advocates. Now, Khadijah, my next question is for you. Tell us, when did you come into care? And if you don't mind sharing why.
Hi. So I came into care, I believe in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. Before then, I was living with my mother and my sister in Brooklyn, New York. My mom passed away. So my sister had, my mother and my sister and my father had, I guess, a back and forth about who was going to keep me. So eventually my father ended up losing his parental rights, and I ended up entering into care. From there, I went from my sister in kinship guardianship. Then I went into a foster home, and then I also did an ICPC I moved to Pennsylvania, and I lived with my godmother for a little while. And I didn't. Then from there, I came back here. Just a lot of moving around.
Well, thank you for sharing that, for being so candid with us. And my next question is for both of you, and Khadijah, maybe you can continue telling us a little bit about your story. When and how did you meet each other? Tell us a little bit about that first time meeting Barbara. What were your first impressions?
Well, because I was doing all that moving around, our first impression of her was just on the phone. I only spoke to her over the phone. So that was my first interaction. And I really she's very polite and she was nice, but I didn't really know what her role was in my life yet. So it was just, the distance kind of just made everything unsure.
And Barbara, tell us from your side, tell us a little bit about that first meeting. How did that come about?
Yeah, Diana, it's a similar response to Khadijah's. And I'd like to explain the ICPC is interstate something, which means when a youth is in care in New York and moves to another state, New York and CASA in particular try to make sure that the move goes carefully, go that the use is stable. So because she was in Pennsylvania, we went by phone, and my first impression was just she was quiet, polite, didn't really have a sense of her. Our relationship was quite uncomplicated for a while, and I actually thought it'd be rather brief. I thought her life would become rather stable in Pennsylvania, and then I'd step away. But life doesn't always work out that way, and things changed, which I think you'll hear a little bit more about from Khadijah or from me a little later. But that was my first impression in our first meeting.
How long were you two corresponding over the phone before you actually met in person?
We only spoke, I believe, one time. And then it was just like, I'm telling you, everything just hit the ceiling. And I was just like, it's just the only person I could think of. And then we started to, she started to coach me through a tough situation. And we were just, we had a group meeting with a therapist I was speaking to in Pennsylvania. And, I just felt like being in foster care, I thought I was crazy about what was going on. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to call her and speak about it. And she's like, no, this is wrong. And then we just started building a relationship from there.
Wonderful. Khadijah, so I know that you were close to aging out right before you met Barbara. Tell us, what was important for you to secure or take care of before you did?
As I was aging out, I found myself in an emergency situation. So I thought that I was going to age out in Pennsylvania and, continue to go to college and start my life there. But then my godmother, we got into a very toxic situation. And, being in foster care, you don't have all your documents. So I had a joint account with her and, my savings, I'm missing money out of my account. So we had a disagreement. Barbara stepped in and she helped me move from Pennsylvania. And I'm just before I'm aging out. So I'm 20 years old. I aged out when I'm 21. And has to be May. My birthday's in August. So she helps me move from Pennsylvania to New York City, back with my sister. She helped me get back into college because once you age out in a foster care, the agency doesn't really deal with anything extra with you. You're just done out the system. So it was just helping me find a job, helping me get back into school. And sorry, I'm so sorry. Helping me, it was a lot. She helping me get back into school. NYCHA, my apartment, furniture. I aged out, but she still makes sure that I have resources. So it's just a never-ending relationship, and we're still learning from each other. She's right.
That's wonderful to hear. Barbara, turning it back to you, tell us, how are you helping? So you just told us a lot of how you've helped her, but from your perspective, how do you feel you're helping her meet her goals?
Diane, I'd first like to say that when a youth ages out of foster care, it is a pivotal time in their lives, a time which can involve a very abrupt transition from having all the decisions made for them and not with them, to being totally independent. And the pandemic, I'd like to say, has only exacerbated these problems. And it's really shown us, if we didn't know already, how close to the edge so many of our youth are living in normal times, much less during COVID. And Khadijah mentioned, to be specific, she mentioned employment. She didn't give herself enough credit. Khadijah, when she moved back to New York, she and her sister were able to find a job where she was able to be an assistant to youth, children with special needs. And Khadijah loved this because when she was in care in Pennsylvania, her foster brother had cerebral palsy, and she was the main person taking care of him. She loved that. Since then, Khadijah and I have worked on several jobs. She has worked for the census. She has done office work. She's now working in a video store. In fact, she just got back from work just recently, just tonight. Again, she's very resourceful, so she has found some of these jobs on her own. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on the college, which Khadijah mentioned. We thought the transfer from her college in Pennsylvania to the CUNY system, to BMCC, Borough of Manhattan Community College, specifically would go smoothly, but of course it didn't. There was some misunderstanding about her GPA in her college in Pennsylvania. And as a result, she wasn't able, we thought, to transfer. So with her permission, I spoke to the dean of the college and explained the miscommunication, the misunderstanding, and the dean was very cooperative and rectified that situation. And her GPA was adjusted to its right number. And then the transfer to BMCC, again, we thought it would go smoothly, but we didn't. There were certain bumps along the way, and I was able to contact, there are organizations, offices, I should say, in the CUNY system that deal specifically with young people in foster care or young people who've aged out. And working with a couple of the people in these different offices, we were able to resolve any issues that had come up. And I'm very happy to say that Khadijah is now in her second year at BMCC. And so that worked out well. Her financial situation, which has always been shaky, as it is for everyone in foster care, it is even more so because she's not on public assistance or welfare. So she has had to cobble together her income from different sources. During COVID, CASA, it's not only me, but CASA in general, has been able to help her. Well, we mentioned the employment, but obtain a COVID stimulus check. Again, you'll hear me say this a lot. I should learn, when I think something will go smoothly, it often doesn't. And this should have gone smoothly. It did with the other youth I work with, but it didn't. So I was able to enlist the assistance of my own accountant, and he did her application and was able to get the stimulus check for her. Also through CASA, we're working on special grants that are designated for youth aging out of foster care in COVID. And CASA has helped Khadijah pay off some of her outstanding debts. So that's how we have helped her, especially during COVID. And Khadijah, I think you mentioned the housewarming gifts. Did you mention them or not?
So one of the things about being in foster care is that, like, you age out and you really don't have anything. So I struggle with, CASA doesn't just help you, they help you do better. So like Barbara said, when I had financial situations, okay, we're gonna help you, but we're gonna teach you how to get back on track, teach you how to budget, what's cheaper, what can you do better, like, you know, other than living outside your means. My furniture, I had got my apartment, and, you know, as far as like my bed, curtains, like appliances, like things that I need to be a functioning adult, you know, CASA has helped me with that. So it's just like, you know, they always make sure that you grow. So it's just not, what's that word? Enabling you.
Wonderful. And Khadijah, kudos to you for being able to use your resources. That's wonderful to hear. Barbara, you talked to us about sort of how you're helping Khadijah in aspects of her life, but we're curious to learn a little bit more about how you learned to navigate the foster care and child welfare systems as a CASA advocate.
Sure, Diana. And keep in mind that these are huge systems. They're all acronyms, which I won't waste your time saying, you may know already, but HRA, ACS, SNAP, NYCHA, these are huge systems. In addition, there is a group of people working with Khadijah, not only her CASA worker, me, but there's an attorney, there's caseworkers, social workers, educators that can play a role, who are all involved in making decisions that affect her life. And unfortunately, these different people and these agencies don't often communicate with each other. So they'll have their own information, but that's all they know. They don't know the big picture. And I view one of my main roles as the CASA is to, one, talk to everyone who's involved working with Khadijah. then sharing that information. So not only do I have it, but every other person who has a role in making a decision about her life has the same information. And then perhaps the biggest one is following up. There are very well-intentioned people who, for whatever reasons, don't follow up. And a big role of a CASA is to stay on it, be assertive, be aggressive, do whatever it takes to make sure that the decisions that have been made, that there is follow through. And they actually, and also breaking down these different silos that I mentioned, it's so important that we're not talking about Khadijah, that we're talking with her, and that she is at the center of every discussion and every decision that's made.
Wonderful to hear that. Khadijah, I'd love to hear about your life a little bit more. We talked a little bit about COVID, and I'll ask you how that's impacted you. But tell us, what was your life like before the pandemic? You talked a little bit about school and such, but give us a little bit more insight on your life before the pandemic.
It was easier to, I guess, handle certain situations. Since COVID, I had to deal with NYCHA, so also with school, but my financial situation, you can't really speak to anybody over the phone. So it was just quicker for me to handle my business, like get things going. And I guess just during COVID, I kind of feel like stumped, like everything slowed down. And I guess, Barbara's been helping me navigate through things. I'm still working. I was able to find a job, but I guess limited hours, everything has just been cut short. So school's been put on pause. I got a dog. So it's just, a shift in responsibility, and everything has just slowed down for me.
Thank you for sharing that response. I know all of our lives have changed, but I appreciate you being candid about yours. Barbara, keeping on that topic of the pandemic, how do you feel your advocacy has changed since we've had to shift into this different world during the pandemic?
We've had to shift in, I'd say, very significant ways, Diana. The pandemic really exacerbated the challenges that our young people are facing and have been facing all along, but their problems are exacerbated. And it just highlights how close to the edge most of our youth are living. Almost all of the issues that are facing the young adults I work with are complicated, are nuanced, at times are messy. And before COVID, we could explain them to a person, to a human. With COVID, as we all know, in all of our lives, everything overnight went to computers and interacting online. That's fine if you have a simple, straightforward issue or situation. But as I said, not one that I've worked on has been straightforward. And it was, especially in the beginning, almost impossible to reach a person to explain. The computers just were more, I'll say, binary, yes or no. Yes, this is okay. No, it's not, with nothing in between or no opportunity to explain. So what I did is I found an online resource, which I've actually used in my whole career, which lists people who are employed in senior positions for New York City, New York State, their contact information, their phone numbers, their emails. And I started going up the chain of command. And what I found, which isn't surprising, that the higher up the people were, the more likely it was that I would reach them, or probably someone who worked in their office. And that's what I did, again, especially in the first few days when it was the only other possibility was to interact with a computer, and that just was not working. So I would go up the chain of command and end up, if no one responded, the commissioner's office in one of these agencies. And while the commissioner didn't usually call me back, someone in his or her office did. And that's how we got issues resolved in the first few months of the pandemic. As I said, now it's better. We're 8 months into the pandemic. There are still problems with communication, but the first few months really, and I'm not being hyperbolic, were a nightmare. Another thing that's changed since the pandemic is the way Khadijah and I communicate. we would meet on a regular basis in our office. Now, our office was a diner in Brooklyn, and over Belgian waffles, we would talk about anything and everything. We'd start with the CASA-related issues, with housing, education, but then we'd move on because we do have, I think we click, we have a very good relationship to other things, books, movies, at times romances. Now, they were Khadijah's romances, not mine. And we laugh a lot, and we still do that. But I really miss the in-person communication. And I know we will go back to that, but I miss those Belgian waffles and Khadijah.
We'll talk a little bit more about communication, but before we do that, Barbara, you mentioned a number of different challenges that you were already experiencing as a pair before COVID, being exacerbated after the fact. I'm curious, is there one thing that worries you the most during this time and your relationship with Khadijah?
I'm not as worried about Khadijah because, as I said before, Khadijah is very resourceful. If I may just mention another youth, just before COVID, she lost all of her benefits, and she's a parent, a young parent of a toddler, and she was living in public housing, NYCHA. She had public assistance, she had food stamps, she had Medicaid, and for mistakes that were made, she lost her benefits just before COVID. When I say it was a nightmare, trying to reach the right people who could restore her benefits was so difficult. And to me, it was a true emergency situation. Young woman with a 2-year-old, having no income. She was getting eviction notices from her public housing. And that's when I really thought, well, I'm just going to keep calling till somebody answers. And eventually, and it wasn't fast, it took a few months, we were able to get her benefits restored. CASA was a big help. CASA does, as Khadijah mentioned, provide support to young people. But that's what I worry about, that I worry a lot about the people who don't have CASAs. What would have happened to her if she didn't have a CASA? I honestly think she'd be in a shelter now, and she might have lost custody of her baby, and she happens to be a wonderful mother, and that would have been a tragedy at every level.
I want to go back, Khadijah, to the communication piece. From your perspective, is there anything you want to add about how the communications between yourself and Barbara have changed during COVID?
I miss Barbara. I feel like I don't, a lot of people don't know that it's not just, financial issues. It's just like, we're alone most of the time. So, if I'm going through something or if I'm having a tough day, I can call Barbara and, I could, everybody has their mental breakdown. You have long days, you just really need to talk to somebody. And, for most people, you have someone to call. And, for me, it's Barbara. So it's just, being able to meet on a regular basis, social contact. I just miss people,
I hear that. Khadijah, we talked about your experience working with Barbara, but tell us now about your experience working with non-CASA professionals. How did you feel supported or unsupported by non-CASA professionals while you were in care?
Honestly, I mean, it kind of just shows that I don't speak to anyone. I don't speak to anyone out like other than Barbara from my foster care experience. So I don't speak to any staff members. There's no update. Once they let you go, they just let you go. And it kind of just shows the level of how personal they get with you, or how much they care once you leave the system, or how limited resources is. Because, when I aged out, I didn't get anything. Like, it was just a good luck. I didn't get help with housing. I didn't get help with school. And what made it just very detrimental was the emergency situation I'm in. I have a few months to age out, and I was really, really stressed about exactly where my life was going, because in my mind, I thought I was set up someplace else. So it was just, unsupported. I felt definitely unsupported.
I can imagine that's daunting, as Barbara mentioned earlier, going from having resources to then the next day not. Barbara, you talked about going out and trying to find people to get help and to find resources. What was your experience working with non-CASA professionals? Were there people that were more supportive, and were there others that were unsupportive?
Well, that about sums it up, Diana. There are some wonderful people in every role, and this might sound a little Pollyannish, but it's true, as with every field. And some people who are responsive, who care, and there are others who aren't. And one of the jobs that I have, and I've been working on for 5 years and will continue to, is find out who are the people who care, who will respond, who will get back to us, and who will help us to resolve the issues. And, you know, I understand, say, well, people have huge caseloads, we don't. All of that's true. And that's why it's wonderful that most of us have small caseloads. I don't know, I guess I'm not too sympathetic to them. I still think if you're in a position which involves a young person, you have a responsibility to take it very seriously. But I know people, there are some legitimate reasons why people cannot get as involved as we do. But that's why CASA does it, because we take the time and we care.
And Barbara's Wonder Woman, so.
That must help a little bit.
Yes.
Khadijah, so I know you're involved in giving back, and I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more about your experience on the Youth Leadership Council.
Right now, I am an alumni. I work a lot, like just maintaining your own, like maintaining a life in New York City. So I try to always keep myself busy, and then with school. So, you know, when I can, I really try to, you know, I spoke to judges, you know, we speak to upcoming CASA workers who's interested. And we, you know, my experience, try to tell people my experience, but, you know, just, you know, more so how Barbara impacted my life. And I kind of feel like that's the goal. We want incredible superheroes to impact each and every youth worker, like youth in foster care. So I kind of hope that I'm like at least 5% responsible for that.
Well, tell us, what do you think you're most proud of coming out of your work on the council?
That's a hard question. You got I wasn't prepared for that one. I think I'm proud of the growth. We're a family on youth council, so I just like the growth of all the other members. I feel like everybody's always doing something new and different, and you know, all the new ideas that we bring to the table. I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like we're doing something great. So I don't know, that was a hard question, but I think that, you know, we're responsible for like a small piece of, you know, our side being heard. And I think that my favorite event was speaking to judges and seeing people wanting to hear what we had to say, and was open-minded to, okay, not everything that we do works. So changing minds.
And when you've spoken to judges or other people that you've encountered on the council, what sort of advice do you give them when you're doing these presentations?
I feel like do your best. I feel like being in care and dealing with caseworkers, they didn't do their best. They did their bare minimum. Like, they did just enough. I feel like what you have to offer, put your own style and flair into it, and don't be afraid to take risk. Be kind and compassionate, you know, and be thoughtful. I'm always thoughtful. So I feel like that's a start.
Barbara, same question for you. When you are talking to other folks, other advocates, et cetera, what advice do you give them?
I guess the first thing I say, and I think most of them know this, but listen. And listen for many reasons. The obvious one, I mean, that's the only way you're going to get to know the youth. our role isn't to solve problems. We're sort of coaches or mentors, and to really listen and to make sure that the youth, again, is in the center of every situation. I mentioned that a few times because they're not always. The system is not set up to really listen to young people, especially young adults. When I emphasize the adults, they are more than capable of making their own decisions, certainly more than anybody else is. So to listen and to always be there. Khadijah has said to me and other people that very often the CASA is the only person in that young person's life who is always there, who will always take the phone call, always answer the email or the text. And as she mentioned earlier, the calls aren't, or the communication isn't always about something like my NYCHA lease or something, my housing lease. It's often just as you would with anybody you care about. This is going on with my life. I'm happy or I'm sad. And to just be there, be consistent. Because so many people in foster children's lives have been inconsistent, whether it's the people who are hired by the system who have, as I said, many in their caseload, but also move on. I have young people I work with who have had, I don't know, 6 different caseworkers in like 2 years or something. So there's obviously a lack of consistency. So to be consistent, listen, obviously care. I don't think anyone could go into this if they didn't care, but start there and take your cues from the youth. We say in CASA that we amplify their voices. We are not their voices. They are not voiceless, but we have the opportunity sometime to be able to amplify what they have said to us and to do that.
Wonderful, thank you. Before we transition to the audience Q&A, I'm curious, Barbara and Khadijah, is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't touched on right now?
It's a good question. I can't think of anything, Diana.
Throwing them out there.
All right, well, thank you. At this point, we'll go ahead and we'll transition to the audience Q&A.
Okay.
Thank you so much for engaging in the conversation.
Thanks, Diana. It was a pleasure.
Hi, yes, I'd like to thank you guys as well. Thank you to our panelists for this truly enlightening discussion. My name is Kimberly Way, and I am a member of the Associate Board. And I will be opening up this discussion to our audience. And as such, will moderate tonight's Q&A session. I encourage everyone in the audience to send their questions in the Q&A box for me to present to our speakers. Before we get started though, I'd like to remind everyone that bidding in our online auction ends at 7:15. We're grateful to the companies who have supported our auction and to you for supporting CASA-NYC's mission in this fun way. We'll announce the winners later this evening. Remember, some items have reduced starting bids, so please go and check those auction items out, and great luck. The auction link is in the chat box. So let's dive on in. As I see, we're getting a lot of questions so far, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible, but realize that we won't be able to get to every question. So the first one that we have from our audience is for you, Barbara. If you could tell us a little bit more about your interactions with caseworkers.
Sure, Kimberly. I think it's important, and I think we obviously are more effective if we have a positive, good relationship. What I've found with the person we're working with, and what I've found with caseworkers, sometimes they have no idea what a CASA is, what my role is, and at first they're cautious, and I understand that I would be also if someone called me and said, this is who I am. That we might be someone doing some oversight to their work, or and I think to make it clear that we're there to help. And on a very practical level, after I introduce myself, what I try to do is to see how I can help that caseworker. So the caseworker sees me as a positive resource and not just another person they have to answer to. So if I learn something about the youth, I'll share that with the caseworker. And as I said before, with actually everyone on the team. And I'll ask them, how can I help you? What would you like to accomplish that you're just not able to? How can I help you? So for the most part, actually, I'd say always I've had positive relationships with caseworkers. It doesn't happen instantly in one phone call. In a sense, I have to prove myself. I have to demonstrate, yeah, I am there to help, and this is how I can help, and I will help you, and I'll do it.
As a follow-up to that, do you have any recommendations or tips that you think that would help with the onboarding to new caseworkers as introducing CASA to them?
That's a great question. I don't think they know. I think there's no onboarding about CASA. So I would start with that. If maybe CASA does this and I'm not aware of it, but I haven't participated in any presentations to caseworkers. I think that would be a great idea. Of course, there are so many of them, I don't know how we could handle the number, but yeah, I think that's a great question. And implied in that is explaining what our role is, as I said before, that it's one to help and to help the youth, but that means helping them. And I think it'd be great if we could explain, because I find it's on a one-on-one basis. Every time I introduce myself, almost always they have never heard of CASA.
Okay. Thank you for that. My next question is for you, Khadijah, and this is also from our audience. Can you tell us more about your time with the Youth Leadership Council? Did you make any friends that you still keep in contact with?
Yes, I do. I don't keep in contact, but I feel like we're all pretty close. It's really been a while. I feel like COVID really, like my life, I've had a lot going on in my life recently and just, working, but I feel like it's still love. So if I, when I come back or, when we speak to each other, there's still, I understand you and you understand me there. So, yeah.
I think that, COVID has definitely made keeping relationships and friendships difficult. Is there anything that would help facilitate with keeping in contact during this time for you?
Hopefully one day I just win the lotto and I don't have to dreams.
Well, I do have another follow-up question for you, Khadijah, from our audience. And you had talked a little bit about this previously, of what it was like when you aged out. Can you expand on those experiences and what support you would recommend youth receiving when they age out?
Can you please repeat the question? I am
Absolutely.
so sorry.
If you could talk a little bit more about how it was for you when you aged out, and if you have any recommendations for things that youth could receive that would help them in their experiences when they age out.
Well, with my experience, patience. I'm still learning how to be patient. So the process of aging out can be extremely frustrating because you don't know what you want to do or where you're going to go or how comfortable you're going to be, once you age out. So it's just being patient, always using your resources, and always self-affirmation. I always think I'm great. I always have to just stay positive. That's what I've learned.
That's really great. I'm glad to hear that. And for you, Barbara, take it back to a little bit more about being a CASA. So what exactly does a CASA do? You have had to attend court, or what is your role in experiences with dealing with court?
Oh, with dealing with court, I really enjoy court. I think we play a very important part in court, Kimberly. First of all, as I mentioned before, we are the only person who has spoken to everybody involved in the case. We write reports, court reports. We're very careful with them. They're comprehensive, they're complex, and they're not biased. There's no bias, as probably most of you know. It is not our role to make a recommendation. CASA New York City, we do not do that, but it's to present the information. So as a result, my experience has been that the judges really value us and especially our reports. And in almost every court appearance I've been in, the CASA report is the first report that the judge reads. The judge gets reports from other people on, say, Team Khadijah, but ours is the only one that is comprehensive, that involves input from everyone. And as I said, it's not biased, it's just presenting the facts. And then the other thing we said, as I mentioned earlier, in general, we follow up. So if decisions are made in court, we take very careful notes and follow up with the people who are responsible for those decisions and keep following up until the actions are completed.
With respect to judges, Khadijah, you mentioned that part of your role with the Youth Leadership Council is that you spoke to judges. Can you expand a little bit more on that? What conversations or meetings would you have with them?
So it was just more of like just like a panel. Each of us told our stories and, you know, our different circumstances, where we end up, how often we went to court, and what we were expecting inside of the courtroom. And then they gave us our perspectives, you know, and why things are set the way they are. And, you know, I guess if we traded information, like so for us to help other youth to be comfortable in the courtroom and what they can do to help their youth be comfortable in the courtroom. So those kinds of conversations.
Okay. And for you and your experiences when you attended court, what was that like for you?
I never had a bad experience in court because I felt like the only time I was supported or when I had an idea what was going on was when I went to court. And plus I got a day off school. So come on, I was a kid. Of course I was going.
Okay. This is a question from one of our attendees for you, Barbara. How do you handle a situation when a young person is making a decision that you do not feel is in their own best interest?
Oh, that's the $64,000 question. That is so hard. As I said before, our role is to amplify their voice, not to be their voice. It's easy to say that. It's hard to do if I think they're making it not the best choice. What I can do is, and what I try to do though, is listen, understand their reasons for making the decision, making sure they understand the pros and cons, the consequences, as well as the advantages of that decision. And I do let them know, once we have a relationship, what my opinion is, but I make sure, or I try very hard to not enforce that, because first of all, I'll lose the relationship. One thing they don't need is someone else telling them what to do. But I will say that's really tough. And I have experienced that time when I think I know better, but that's not my role. My role is to make sure they have all the information they need to make the decision, and then to be supportive, because the one thing I want is to stay involved in their lives. And if things go well, that's wonderful. But if things don't, I'm there too. And but it is tough. I can't say, I would not be telling the truth if I didn't say that's very difficult. Oh, and I noticed another question, if I can jump in, because before we end, I'd really like to say it, and it's somewhat tied to this question I just answered, is the role of the training CASA gets and our supports. We get a tremendous amount of supports. I think it's 30 hours we have to put in training before we start. I'm pretty sure that's the number of hours for our initial training. Then we have trainings every month. We have a wonderful system of support from, I have a great supervisor, I call her, and with issues like the one that I was just asked, I've said to her, well, so-and-so wants to do this and I don't get input. Also group supervision. So one reason, and I didn't answer this before, why I love CASA is the ongoing education, these ongoing trainings in specific fields, and the support we get from CASA staff and from our colleagues, our fellow CASAs in group supervision. We get tremendous support and information.
So I guess as a follow-up to your role as a CASA, we have another question about how many youth are simultaneously assigned to each advocate? And
really varies.
About, I'm sorry, the
No, go ahead.
That's of our advocates.
Yeah, it really varies. I have 3 very active cases now because I can. I have the time. Some CASAs don't have the time because I think use cases sometimes are, I don't know if I'd say the most complicated, but some people have 1. It really varies. I don't know if anybody has much more than 3. I'm sure there are people who do, but I'd say it ranges from 1. Certainly when people start, they start with 1 case, and then increase as they're interested in and have the bandwidth to handle. I have the bandwidth for 3 for me.
And there was another training question that came up about what that's like. So maybe if you could go over some of the information that you learned during training that helps you prepare to be an advocate.
The training was very comprehensive. I think the last series you heard from Catherine Conroy, she spoke to us about the welfare system. We cover, working with young adults, working with children, the brain development of a child and an adolescent, what to do in court, how to write a court report. One thing that I always remember, they showed us some photographs of apartments that at first glance I'd say looked messy, and they might have a parent and a child in it. And they said, look at this picture and tell us what's positive in it. And they could have like food on the floor and messy, looks like 3 people sleep in 1 bed. But to take a positive, we call it a strengths-based approach. Well, look, we'll say, well, maybe there is food and maybe there's a reason it's on the floor. Sometimes there is. But to take an approach from a positive perspective, not a negative. And that really helps them with the relationship if we do that as well. Look at the individual's strengths.
Okay, thank you so much. I wanted to turn our original questions over back to you, Khadijah, when we asked Barbara about how she handles talking to a youth that she may not believe is making a decision in their own best interest. For an adult or for an advocate that is speaking to a youth that they may feel is not making a decision that they agree with, what would you recommend to someone speaking to a youth?
Well, Barbara, I mean, I think it's just based off the relationship because so when I first came back to New York City, I was having such a hard time signing up for school. So I was like, Barbara, I don't even want to go back to school. Maybe I should just, she starts laughing. She's like, she said, so here's your options. And she was very polite, but I knew she was just like, you got to be joking. This is because somebody who cares about you is going to sit there and tell you that this is not, I'm going to say this nicely, but I need to give you more options because this is not making any sense. So she always gives options. She always makes sure that I'm doing a decision that's best for me, tailored for me. It's never anything that I'm not interested in, or just be a good listener and don't try to, force your opinion, and gently. Always apply options.
Options and listening. Okay. And listening definitely came up earlier. So thank you.
And Kimberly, if I could jump in on that too, it's so much depends on where you are in the relationship. When I first met Khadijah or any other young person, I hope I wouldn't say, well, this is what you should do. This is what you should do. Khadijah and I have known each other for 5 years. So we have a very comfortable relationship. I feel a lot more comfortable at this point saying to Khadijah, I recommend this, whereas I wouldn't in year 1. Because Khadijah is, a very self-sufficient young woman, and she can, and at times does say, well, I don't agree. Again, very politely, but she says it, and that's fine. But for most of our relationship, again, as I said, we amplify their voices, and it's not always easy to remember that, but that is what we should do.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for that. We have several other questions. Let's make sure we get to as many as possible. Okay, so Khadijah, another one for you. Where do you see yourself in the future in the next 5 or 10 years?
Hopefully being called doctor something because like school has just slowed down, but hopefully I'll be finished with college, have my own practice, just comfortable and just probably giving back the way, like, you know, passing on the good karma.
Okay. Well, I cannot wait to call you Dr. Alexander. Okay, and then more questions about court. So have you gone to any court sessions now? What's that like? Are they virtual? Like, have you court since?
I haven't, Kimberly. My understanding is that they're all virtual, but even that said, they're not happening the way they used to, and that the court is only open for emergency situations. I don't think I'm wrong about that. So there will be a hearing, and I don't know if that's virtual or in person with emergencies, but I have not had any even. Well, I had a meeting, I don't know what it was called now, with a judge and other people involved in a case that was virtual, but it wasn't an official, I think it was a conference that was called. It wasn't an official court hearing. They've, I think, for at least for the most part, have been postponed.
Okay. And that was virtual?
Yes. Yes, it was virtual. Yes.
Okay. Let's go ask this one for you, Barbara. Do you think it would be helpful if CASA volunteers attended trainings to help them develop meaningful and ongoing relationships with teachers of their CASA youth?
Well, I guess I'd answer that by saying, and I think, that's part of our training, and that might not be specifically with teachers, but how to interact with other people who affect the youth's life. So I would say yes, and I do think to a large extent we have that. I think the more in general we can communicate with everybody and understand their perspectives, the better. I actually had a one young child, a little one who was 4, who was in school, and it was very important for me to interact, or to meet, I should say, and communicate with her teacher and her principal. Not so sure that I needed specific training over and above the training we already get as to how to present ourselves, all of the things that I've already mentioned.
Who are all the different people that you interact with as part of CASA?
Well, in addition to, of course, the whole CASA staff, and on the staff, there are people who are experts. There's an expert in housing, there's an expert in education. But then, as I mentioned, everybody involved, and I call it, as I said, Team Khadijah. So at one point, it was the educators, it was the dean of her college, and it was somebody at CUNY in New York, certainly the attorneys, certainly the caseworkers, the social workers. I spoke to Khadijah's sister once. Khadijah and I did that together. But anybody and everybody who's involved in Khadijah's life or the youth's life, I think it's extremely important. So that can list, it could be, it wasn't in Khadijah's case, but it could be doctors, it could be therapists, of course, with the youth's permission. Again, pretty much we're not limited as to who we can speak to. In fact, we're encouraged as part of our job to speak to everybody.
And that's a lot of people. So Khadijah, as a youth, what was it like having all these different people that were a part of your life, as far as you've got caseworkers and social workers and CASAs, and then just like teachers, and it goes on and on. What was it like having all of those different people?
Very different from my childhood. I had a very I have a very small family, and on top of that, I'm just socially awkward. So it was just a lot to deal with. Just, you get a new caseworker and you got to explain to them what's going on. And if you need something, you got to explain to another person. If you want to go somewhere, you want to spend the night out, you need a Metro card. It's like you're always asking for permission, or what's the next step, or you always have to, or there's a new goal for you, or it was a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Was it trouble keeping track of all the different people that you would have to ask questions to or interact with?
Yes, it's like listening to 10 different songs. And it's kind of hard when you just got 10 people talking in your ear to sink in that one person. So
thank you for that. Another training question, but for you, Khadijah, did you get training for being on the Youth Leadership Council?
Yes, I did. And if I'm not mistaken, when we first started out, we did the whole summer together. And each year we have a new training. It's if I'm not mistaken, and it's just like an update about what's going on, new things, new networking skills, public speaking, and each of us get, I guess, what we can improve on every now and again. So you're always training, you're always improving.
So would you say a lot of the trainings that you were in for Youth Leadership Council were for professional in nature type trainings?
Yes, how to, I guess, what parts of your story makes you comfortable. Because, like everyone else, there's moments that you are just like, you can't speak about certain things. So just your comfortability, what kind of message you're trying to get out there. How do you feel about the foster care system, and how you want everyone else to feel? So, those kind of things. I think, I don't know, do not want to be wrong. It's been a while. So, and I guess like coping mechanisms. Gosh, it's been a while. I'm gonna stop right there before I'm gonna mess this up.
No, not at all. Not at all. Do you have any advice for youth that are considering being a part of the Youth Leadership Council?
I think the message you always want to give is what's important to you, something that's close to your heart. So you find that time where you felt like you needed, or you find the time where you felt like you were helped, or you felt that you were safe or comfortable, and you show those different aspects to people, because it's not always just a bad time. You also have times where, like I said, me and Barbara spend time together. We talk about everything, books and stuff like that. So it's not just black, it's black and white and some blue. And so always show all aspects of your life when you're telling your story.
Thank you for that. This question is for both of you. So we'll start with Barbara. What do you think makes a good advocate?
That's a really good question. First of all, I mentioned that I had a career in social services. That is absolutely not required. Absolutely not. What's required is a real interest. Obviously, we're volunteers. So I think pretty much by definition, anyone who decides to become one cares about the issues facing young people in care. But to have that interest, be open to the trainings, which are so beneficial, be open to supervision, and not to worry about your background. What makes us a richer group of people is that we do have so many different backgrounds, and those backgrounds can only help different backgrounds in working with someone. And the softer things, when I say softer, I mean, again, we keep mentioning listening over and over, because that's so important. And I'd say being willing to be assertive at times, maybe aggressive, assertive, because keeping in mind that you're not doing this for yourself, you're doing it for a young person in foster care, and willing to, and able to spend the time. The amount of time really varies. As I said, I have 3 active cases that are all, as I said, quite active. So I put in a lot of time, but I'm retired and I can do that. But you should be willing to be able to put in the time that it takes with a young person. And one person might say, well, how much is that? It varies so much. There can be a week with nothing and then a week with, I don't know, 6 hours or something. And I know that can be very hard for someone who's working. So again, the CASA staff start people out slowly. But again, the main thing is the interest, the willingness, the desire to learn, and the overwhelming desire to see that youth in foster care, young kids, children and youth move into safe and happy and loving homes.
And same question for you, Khadijah. What do you think makes a good advocate?
Trying to figure out what the other person wants, what they need in the message that, they want to relay, and also keep in mind, sharing your experiences. So it's not just about your experience, it's about the other person's experience. So I think it's just being cautious that it's not about you.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you to all of our attendees for your questions. This concludes this evening's Q&A session. We're sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but thank you for everyone for participating, and especially to our speakers.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us.
I'd like to now pass it off to Carmen Napier, who will announce tonight's auction winners.
So today we'd like to announce the winners for the silent auction. We have quite a few items, and I'm really excited to get to this final part of our series. Thanks everybody for the wonderful presentations, and to our moderators for fielding those questions to our presenters. So as we mentioned before, another way to support CASA is through participating in the silent auction. We've had a group of presenters from, we had a group of companies who have generously donated to our silent auction. Some of their names are up there on our on the slideshow right there. We're very thankful for them for donating, particularly during this crisis. The pandemic has hit everybody difficultly with the economic crisis. So it's wonderful that so many local organizations and companies are choosing to come out and support CASA and our mission. Would like to announce today's winners. Winners are Louis O, Alex T, Heidi R, Sadra B, Taylor M, Paige S, Randy I, Chris N, Bobby S, Yvette S, Haiti M, myself, Takuhi, Kimberly W, Kimberly again, Robert A, Charlotte W, Allison S, and finally Joanna I. Congratulations to our winners. You'll receive an email after tonight's program to claim your items. And a special thank you to each and every one of you who placed your bids. Every bid has demonstrated your support of CASA-NYC's mission. So we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Again, thank you for coming tonight. And I'd like to close off tonight's presentation with a few words before we leave. A special thanks to our generous speakers for their time and their knowledge and for sharing their perspective with us. Our associate board has worked really hard to put on this series. We've had 4 thus far. This is the 5th one in that session. And we are very grateful to all of the guests who have so gracefully decided to spend their time with us during tonight's presentation. We've had over 250 guests during the past 2 months that this session has been running. And we're extremely happy that people have been writing back to us and letting us know that they've learned quite a lot about foster care and CASA-NYC's work during this time. We also hope that you will consider supporting CASA-NYC's advocacy work with the most vulnerable children in our city. As Barbara mentioned, the families and children we serve are in even deeper crisis now because of the pandemic. A donation in any amount helps us train and supervise volunteers to help meet children's needs and protect their rights. There will be a link in the chat box or in the next slide as we move through. If you're like us and you're sad that this session is over, this series is over, don't fret. The Associate Board is participating in Giving Tuesday. We'll be sharing more wonderful stories like Barbara and Khadijah's about how they work together and their relationship as they've built it through the time that they've been, well, each youth has been in foster care. We'll be participating in Giving Tuesday, which is the International Day of Giving. It is on December 1st, the second Tuesday of every year, and we'll be raising funds for CASA's mission. And with that said, I'd like to welcome everybody to join us on December 1st. We'll be online and on social media, so please feel free to connect with us there. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their evening, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.